and welcome to The Blank Potato. This horror story is uploaded by Reddit user JamFranz. If you want to learn more about the author, link in the description. The title of this next story is My Wife's Obsession with a Painting is Ruining Our Lives. Before we start, I would just like to invite you to please like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and click that notification bell so you won't miss any of my future uploads. So, get comfy and let's begin. My wife, Samira, had been working in an art restoration for years and was finally promoted to the head of her department. She's always been a talented artist, and the science behind it was an added bonus in her mind. I was so incredibly proud. It was her dream job. At first. For that first year, she was ecstatic, even when she worked 60 hours a week, even as she was restoring famous pieces of art, or pieces so old that any mistake or misinterpretation would be quite literally destroying history. Her words, not mine. She was truly happy. During her career, we developed a tradition. I'd meet her at the museum for lunch and she'd gush about her work. If she could safely take a picture, no flash of course, she assured me, of what she was working on, she'd proudly show me. But a month ago, something changed. I first noticed it in her eyes as we were eating dinner. She stared off into the distance, an unreadable expression on her face. She looked more exhausted than I'd seen her in a long time. "So, what are you working on?" I tried to break the silence. Usually she volunteered the information freely and with excitement, but she had been quiet on this piece, almost avoidant. "You may have heard of this one." Her face finally lit up. "Blind portrait." I shook my head, asked if she could show me. For the first time, she told me no, but maybe I'd recognize it when she was done with it. "You're going to love it when you see it," she replied slyly. It wasn't one of their pieces, she informed me. It was from another prestigious museum, and she was assisting with the restoration after their own team had tried but couldn't finish it. Not the way it deserved, she added. They'd failed. The way she described the piece was with so much affection, I could see why she was pouring so many hours into it. But not long after, she began to change. Her already grueling hours transitioned into her practically living at the museum. When I went to meet her there for lunch, she'd ignore me, sequester herself in the lab instead until I gave up and went back to work. Days would pass without me seeing her, but in the instances I did, I could tell something was eating away at her. She looked exhausted. Her once beautiful hazel eyes had been the color of honey with flecks of greens, blues, and browns. They were the first thing I'd noticed about her when I met her, had begun to look duller and bloodshot, almost as if they were receding into her head. They were ringed with dark circles, and I could have sworn she was even losing hair over it. Over the next week, I must have asked her how she was doing 1,000 times, because she seemed to always have panic written on her face, but she never answered. Eventually, she confided in me the source of her stress. "They say I'm not moving fast enough. I'm not putting enough into it. It's never enough." She looked at me, her eyes red, but tearless, as if she'd already been crying for hours and had nothing left. "It needs to be ready. It needs to be seen, but I'm running out of supplies," she added after studying me for a long moment, in a way that made me feel oddly uncomfortable. I was incredibly pissed off with her employer on her behalf. Samira has always been one of the hardest workers I've ever known. I'm not just saying that because she's my wife either. She puts her all into every single piece of art she restores, and I'd never heard of them trying to rush her to that extent before. The next morning, I woke up, covered in a series of small but deep cuts. The sheets dotted with dried, sticky blood, a small but clear bloody handprint on the bedroom door. Not long after, she brought it home, something I knew she was not allowed to do. I'd learned enough from her years on the job to know that depending on the medium, The pieces were only supposed to be exposed to certain kinds of light, environments, and temperature. She had always treated the art she worked on with so much love and respect. So when I saw her walk into her old and dirty shed with it clutched to her chest, wrapped in a filthy looking sheet, I knew something was very wrong. The next afternoon, I'd got off work early. I had hoped to have a serious conversation with her that night. Figured I'd do some projects around the house while I planned out what I was going to say. I turned on the garage light and jumped. She was standing there in the dark, motionless, even though she should have been at work. "Babe, you feeling okay? Did you come home sick? Where's the saw?" She spoke, as if she hadn't heard me. Her voice strained, almost like she'd been screaming for hours on end. If I hadn't seen her speak the words, I would have never guessed that sound could have ever come out of her mouth. I was so surprised that my thoughts of some sort of intervention were forgotten. "Which one?" She stared down at her hand in silence for a long moment, flexed her fingers. "Circular," she rasped. "Do you want help?" She cradled the saw in her arms, turned, and left without answering me. She was down there all day. I could hear the blade whirring as it struggled to cut through some hard material, even from the house. She finally made an appearance at dinner that evening, but she was pale and walked in swaying steps, her right hand bundled in thick bandages. I felt sick and guilty at the sight of blood staining through it. She refused to let me see her injury and screamed violently at me when I told her we needed to go to the ER. I'm not the one to meddle in her work life, but I'd reached my breaking point. I decided I needed to talk to her boss, Leslie. She and Samira had worked together for so long that we knew her pretty well. We even had dinner with her and her family a few times. So I drove up to the museum and I asked for her. I wasn't sure what I expected when I went up there. A heated argument? A confrontation? But the moment she saw me, she pulled me into an awkward hug. "Alan, I'm so sorry we had to suspend her. How is she? We were hoping she'd get some help." The confusion I felt must have been written on my face, because her expression changed to match my own. "She didn't tell you?" I just shook my head dumbly, thoroughly thrown off by the chain of events. "Samira, she spent every moment working on that horrible painting. We're not even sure where it came from. It isn't even one of ours. She said it was from some other museum that you were helping out." I attempted to pronounce it a few times before finally giving up. She frowned. "No, we aren't partnered with anyone right now. We've got too much of our own work to take on anyone else's. That's why we had to put her on leave. Yes, she was neglecting her work here, but it was the effect that it had on her that worried us. That piece, it was disgusting. I don't say this often, but that wasn't art. Art, well, art has soul, something to give you. That piece had nothing to give. It only wanted to take." I drove home, angry and dumbfounded that my normally honest to a fault wife had been lying to me for weeks. I called out gently for Samira, but she wasn't in the house. I approached our storage shed turned workshop to check on her, but she wasn't there either. I approached the painting. She had made no effort to hide what she was doing. It was like she didn't even think it was wrong. Where do I even begin? The painting itself was an atrocity. I looked up blind portrait, since she refused to show me. After her concerning behavior, I felt I needed to know what it was that she was working on. I didn't find any one specific piece with that name. Instead, that a blind portrait was exactly what it sounded like. One drawn without the artist looking, maybe as a creative exercise or to practice fundamentals. But no, the painting my wife was working on was immaculate. Someone had clearly crafted it with their full vision and attention. It was exquisitely drawn down to the smallest of details. I'm no expert, but the smoothness, the way colors were blended, the detail of the clothing and hair against the backdrop of swirling reds, it was captivating. I'm no expert, but felt it would have even been a masterpiece if it hadn't been so goddamn disturbing. The subject, A woman was beautiful, or rather, she would have been, if the flesh above the exposed teeth wasn't torn in such a way that it almost resembled a playful curling of the upper lip. The teeth, the top row since the bottom jaw was totally gone, a stark white against the background that were so detailed, so realistic, roots and all, that they looked like I could reach out and touch them. I realized why the portrait was called blind. The woman, she had no eyes, rather just dark holes in her skull where they should have been. The twin streams of blood and damage to the delicate skin around them that the artist focused on in painstaking detail suggested they had been there at some point though. The longer I stared, the more I felt tempted to reach out and touch it. To complete it, I felt myself striding towards it, clawing at my skin, reaching for my eyes. She'd looked so incredible with a pair of her own. What finally snapped me out of it was when I got close enough for the smell to hit me. It was so overpowering that my eyes began watering profusely, breaking my eye contact with it. I couldn't help but gag when I realized how exactly Samira had been restoring it. The reds of the background behind the woman, they held the odor of copper and faint decay of blood mixed with paint. Long bits of white bone with cut marks had been haphazardly added to fill the missing portions of the frame. The teeth, there was a reason they looked so realistic. Exposed roots placed lovingly, completing where the woman's should have been. Samira had flashed me a nod, but otherwise perfect smile just the night before. I wondered how many others had tried restoring the painting. What exactly had she meant when she said that they failed? Leslie's words about the painting only taking were fresh in my mind. I waited up for Samira for hours that night. I eventually heard her come in, and the sound of her ancient sofa protest as she fell into it. "Babe," I whispered cautiously, "we need to talk." She ignored me, her back turned, and eventually I headed back upstairs. I should have never left her. I should have tried harder to get her help. She was gone again in the morning. I searched for her in the house before finally finding her standing in a shadowy corner of the dark shed. She was painting what appeared to be crudely drawn, swirling faces with her fingers. Even in the scant light, I could tell what medium she was using to paint with. I tried to go to her. Clearly something was very wrong, and she needed my help. But mid-step, I found myself turning to approach the painting instead. As much as I hated it, as much as it sickened me, I couldn't get it out of my mind ever since I'd seen it. I needed to see it. I needed to complete it. I choked back a sob when I moved back the fabric covering it. I still hate myself for the fleeting pang of jealousy that I felt. It was finished. There was a new addition since the last time I'd seen it. A pair of perfect hazel eyes. If you enjoyed that horror story, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, and click one of the videos here if you want more horror stories like that. And as usual, I'll see you again next time.